Hello and welcome back to the Sport and Crypto podcast. Back again for another episode, and I am joined this time by a long-time listener, reader, friend, Chris Cheung, who is a partner over at TenSquared. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing well. How are you, Bet?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This has been long awaited, I suppose. I suppose long awaited between you and I, but great to finally get behind the microphones respectively and record this.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Like you mentioned, I've been listening for a very long time. Always been a fan. Gotten a couple interesting investment ideas and chats with founders out of the podcast. So glad to be on the other side of the mic.
Fantastic. So why don't we set the scene here? TenSquared, what are you guys and what is the investment thesis for the firm?
You know, in terms of background, myself and my two other investment partners, Stan and Paulina, we originally started the fund thinking we'd be generalist blockchain investors. That's what we've done for the previous 5 years. And that was our intention in 2020 when we launched TenSquared Capital. But very quickly, we sort of came to the realization there was a very unique niche that we can target, which we think is sort of a generational investment opportunity with a bunch of factors coming together. So right now we're completely focused on investing in the attention economy, which for us is media entertainment, sports, the creator economy, and that intersection of blockchain technology. And we came to this conclusion when we thought about sort of two big broad trends. The first being the idea that attention's becoming financialized. We were seeing the rise of prediction markets. We saw what was happening when specifically you look at sports and the fact you can't go anywhere or you can't watch any sport without seeing various sport betting apps. We saw meme tokens, but also meme stocks. Anything about culture can be financialized and traded. So we saw that happening. We thought that this was a very, very interesting area to be spending our time looking for early stage startup investment opportunities.
So you mentioned the attention economy there. Of course, specific to the sub-industry that we cover in sports, why has that become a bit more captivating to the investment thesis for TenSquared specifically?
Yeah, I think it's sports as an entire asset class is fundamentally transformed. When you think about, for a long time, it was interesting. There'd be high net worth individuals, making investments. But now, I think across the entire capital stack, sports has become fundamentally very interesting, whether it's funds like Apollo setting up credit vehicles for it. You have large private equity firms like CBC investing directly in sports teams. You have public vehicles like Liberty Media, where if you want to, make an investment in F1, that's the way you play it. And for us, there wasn't really a early stage venture focus on that, and that's what we want TenSquared Capital to be.
When you think about technology broadly kind of overlapping with sport. I guess over the last 5 years, we saw, especially in the post-COVID era, from an investment perspective, a lot of money pour into new gen sports, into sports tech businesses, into fan engagement propositions. And it's kind of fair to say that a lot of them haven't really hit the mark. I would say there's been a lot more misses than there have been hits. I'd say that sports as an investment class has probably been, apart from the, as you put, the assets, the teams themselves, not that many companies in this in the macro sports world have actually done that well. And so I'm curious to hear when you because you guys were blockchain investors first and foremost, why do you look back at the last 5 or 6 years, but then look at the next 5 or 6 years in a much more positive light?
Firstly, looking backwards, I think it's jelly, right? Most of the value accretion to date has been to valuations in individual teams. And then you also see media rights broadly, increasing by 3 to 10-fold. There has been some winners. I think if you think about the valuations of Whoop and Aura and sort of fitness more broadly, including that in the sports, I think that's been important. And then I think in some sense, if you think about prediction markets and large volume coming from sports, I think those are some key winners. But when we look forward and what makes us even more excited is, I think, number one, how people view and interacts with sports, we believe is fundamentally changing, from watching full games to watching only highlights, from people supporting teams to supporting individuals. We were sort of, I should have known it because I always watch sports, but we were sort of surprised when we were doing some research at most, in each individual league, there's sort of a handful of athletes that are more popular if you look at follower count than the teams and leagues themselves. So thinking about how these individuals can then go on and monetize, like leagues have full systems in place to monetize. These individuals do not. So we think building technology, allowing them to interact with their fans more directly, we think that's very, very important. We think what fans want in terms of their experience is fundamentally changing. So things around fan tech, I think, is very important. Fans want to feel like they're directly involved. They can actually speak to the athletes they support. We think that is very important. And I think the last trend, which even in sporting podcasts you can't avoid, it is sort of AI. Whenever I think our fundamental belief is that AI will actually make sporting events even more valuable, both even if it's in person or if it's a experience you view. It's one of the few things that's still appointment viewing. I'm sure at some point there'll be some generative AI sports that you can watch, but people want to be there for Game 7. They want to be there for a World Cup. So these experiences, I think, the additional time that AI provides us, but also the flood of content you'll see will make the individual sport experience even more and more valuable.
And I guess on that piece, you're talking about fundamentally an inflationary technology, and you're looking at like what is AI proof. I actually wrote a piece about Tether's consumer investment strategy, which chimed very much with you and a lot of your peers. But I kind of laid out all the investments they've made over the past, I guess, 4 to 5 years have been much more payments focused. And actually, they've made more investments into the consumer stack, including into a team at Juventus, over the past 12 months than they have in everything beforehand. And they're still making and leading seed round investments in payment companies, stablecoin businesses, so on and so forth. But I think that they are, like a lot of people, finding that a lot of this tech is almost useless if it doesn't have the distribution. And the distribution is useless unless it's defensible. And the only distribution that is defensible is the stuff that is not disrupted by what we're seeing as a massive paradigm and technology shift in artificial intelligence. And then you start wrapping your head around, well, there's people, right? So personalities and influencers that have defensible audiences because although people can mimic them, their original content and entertainment value will always be, to some extent, the thing that they see they are sought after. But even that, I mean, if you look at a couple of actors have come out and said, we'll be licensing our IP as like us rather than us actually acting in like 10, 15 years time, which I don't know if I buy. Maybe something else will then come into vogue. Maybe we'll go back to the theater and so on and so forth. But sports is one of those things that you can't really like. It's the live event. It's the thing that people go and pay to watch. As you said, it's on appointment. Although, as a corollary to that, I don't watch the live basketball games. I watch the 12-minute highlights. I don't watch the live NFL games. I wake up in the morning and over my coffee, I'll watch the 18-minute packaged highlights. So I do think it's dependent on the event. But anyway, I mean, within that macro that we've kind of laid out, where do you see the opportunities when you're being pitched? How do you look at some of these things that are coming across your desk, and where do you see some of the bigger opportunities?
I think we see two really big themes, or sort of subsectors underneath them. I think the first idea is around fan monetization, and that there is a gap right now between what products are selling for to like the average fan, and then you have your top 5-10% super fan that is severely under monetized, and technology that enables that is important. And I think our other theme is around sort of data and analytics. So it's a targeting the fan monetization idea. And it's also interesting what we talked about, like payments and distribution and sort of that hold on, and do people actually care? It's very interesting when you think about merch. You have the same hat, could be made in the exact same factory. You throw, the Ferrari logo on it, you sell it at, the Italian Grand Prix, and people will buy that for $100 and they'll be happy, they bought it for $100. But you sell that hat in the mall for the Ferrari logo. I don't know if I'd want to pay more than $20 for it. And people are willing to line up, like go through a lot of incremental steps to pay the $100 if that money's going to Ferrari, with that sort of passion and sporting sense built into it. So we've looked at a lot of startups sort of in this view, whether it's the athlete themselves, a creator selling something directly to their fans, so fans feel like, this money isn't going to some third-party middleman platform that's selling it. Like, this is going directly to my favorite athlete. They can get some additional benefits. I think that's something that we've looked at quite a bit. I think things around fan data have been super interesting, where sports organizations know they have a gigantic fan base, but often they are disintermediated, whether it's through ticket platforms, venues, allowing teams to actually sort through their own data, figure out who their fans are, provide them a better experience. We think that is super interesting. And then I think on the data analytics side, we touched very briefly on Whoop, but I think things like wearables for the individual consumer, examples like Strava, I think that's something that's interesting to look at. And then if you add the blockchain angle of both data privacy, but also allowing people to opt in if they want to sell their data, that is interesting. But we also find, sort of going back to the AI idea, sort of new cameras, whether it's something like a Swing Vision or in arena broadcasting, that additional analytics that can transform the broadcast experience, but also be used to improve performance, have all been areas we focused on.
On that data point, right, the Whoop example, I think fascinating, right? Because in an era where public data has become completely commoditized and almost rendered like valueless, you need the best, cleanest input to make the best output, right? And proprietary data is becoming something that is super important. And I actually think Whoop is a really good example, right? And Strava, where they have all this data that is proprietary because it's not public. But then also, how much data do a MLB team have over 82 home games? And if you were able to connect that with all the partners in and amongst that area, but also digitally, there is a huge untapped kind of like bridging solution there. And I think at some point, we talk about sports as an asset class. At some point, the revenues have to become more differentiated than just being 50 to 80% broadcast, which is very illiquid, so to speak, in terms of renewals. There are only so many buyers. Amazon and Apple have kind of dipped toes, but they're not really going all in. Saudi have done it a little bit with investing in DAZN, and DAZN having the FIFA Club World Cup rights, but then they're just about to get the hell out of Live Golf, allegedly, as we record this, allegedly today. And so when people keep saying like the broadcast numbers will keep going and there will always be another bigger buyer, whether it be big tech or a nation state, that's kind of ended up not being true. And maybe it will become true again as an Apple or an Amazon or whoever else comes out of the woodwork. Maybe it's an AI business. I know that would be weird, but maybe not so weird in 5 years. Where do you see the revenue lines being boosted by technology? And then I want to drill into a bit of the blockchain talk where we see the opportunities, right?
One is around sort of the superfan thesis, knowing, I think you see it broadly across society, but I think it applies to sports as well. Like that there is that 5 to 10% of people who are willing to pay way more than whatever's currently being charged for sports, whether it's on a ESPN streaming subscription or, suites at the arena. I think technology is helping teams identify and then sort of get these people to come back over and over again. And I think part of this is also proving out the ROI on sports spending. So we've talked to a number of startups where they're saying that they'll show something on the Jumbotron at the arena. Teams right now can say, we have 41 home games if we're talking about hockey. We have 20,000 fans at each game, and that's sort of, for a long time, that was what sponsors knew and got. But now they're adding, QR codes like in arena activations, and they can actually go back and report, during our 40 games, each time an ad was shown, 10,000 people, like 10,000 highly engaged people claimed some type of, NFT which equaled a discount, or it might have just been a collectible. But now sponsors actually know and are willing to spend this extra bit because they're targeting a very, very specific set. We found that to be very interesting. We also seen a number of ticketing startups, which sort of play across both sports and music, could come into play. I know on the podcast recently, you had Ahmed from KYD, and I think that's something he's doing that's very, very interesting in this space. And I think the last part that is becoming more and more important is around licensing, whether it's for the team, but I think probably more important for the individual athlete level, especially when you think about NIL for collegiate athletes. The technology there, and I think this is probably also the part that's most applicable to AI. We've talked to various companies that have different technologies to protect the athletes themselves as IP, but also allow it so that more and more brands, not just the fanatics of the world, can get access to these athletes.
This podcast is sponsored by the Hedera Foundation. The most beloved sports brands understand that what fans want is simple, a reason to be passionate. The Hedera Foundation enables brands and fans to share their passion on-chain using the Hedera network, the most used sustainable enterprise-grade DLT for the decentralized economy.
And so let's dig into the blockchain side of things, right? So the way I see it right now is there's probably 4 or 5 categories that keep coming up for me as a writer, right? And one of those is most certainly prediction markets. We just spun out a new newsletter, Predicted. Go check that out. On-chain collectibles are another really hot topic. I think those are both the hottest ones. I mean, the latest thing was Fidgetals and Fanatics doing a deal together, which is super interesting considering how big Fanatics' footprint is there after the big acquisitions they've made. And then you also have blockchain ticketing. Still comes up. I think it's one of those things that is, from a technology market fit standpoint, I say all the time, great. It just hasn't really hit from a business market fit yet. And then I think you have a couple of other things that have been long mooted, but maybe not come to the forefront that well. And so one is on-chain loyalty, of course, which we've seen a lot of really poor and pretty good examples of it. Probably the leader right now is Uptop. Were acquired by Rain, which is actually a really interesting angle because I think the kind of verticalization in payments and from a stablecoin perspective, that could be a really interesting play for them. And then the other is kind of, the decentralized ownership of teams or tokenized equities, tokenized RWAs, that entire world. And then I guess the 6th category that I didn't mention, but has seen a real lull is gaming as well. So obviously Mythical Gaming have done a great job with the games that they've produced, but we've also seen in the past So Rare do extremely well, not as well right now. We've obviously seen Dapper with gamified moments. So of those kind of 5 or 6 categories, why don't you run me through step by step where you're at with each of them and where you see the opportunities?
I think prediction markets and collectibles we are extremely interested in. I think in the past month, but perhaps like even the last 2 weeks, we've spoken to multiple startups in that category. I think both of those are well beyond product market fit. I think prediction markets especially. There's a very clear use case is a very clear reason why blockchain for both. I think like the why blockchain in the collectible space is even more important when you think about provenance, when you think about the ability to do instant buybacks, ability for global liquidity. Those are two areas we are spending a lot of time on, and we welcome many founders to reach out to us to building in that space. I think on the ticketing front, it's also interesting. I agree with you at least for me, like I started looking at the blockchain ticketing space maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and very obviously to me, at least, like the technological aspects of it made sense. Like the in theory part of it made a lot of sense. But I could also see, like after talking to 10 plus startups, most of them were able to very quickly find some customer traction, but not an expanding amount of customer traction. And I think for me, the big sort of unlock there, so going back to your conversation of Ahmed and KYD, what was always like this financing gap, which I think what was one of the use cases you did mention that I think is actually very valuable. The ability to sort of use on-chain liquidity pools and use that to help sort of jumpstart the cold start problem of that. You can ticketing start up with great ticketing technology, but if you can't solve the financing needs for different venues, that becomes a challenge in and of itself. So I think whether it's KYD Labs approaching it or someone else, that the fact that there is now the capital available on chain, and also within that large pool of capital, a subset that wants yield, but they want yield uncorrelated to the rest of the digital asset ecosystem, can make ticketing sort of a potential inflection point now. So I think that's been interesting. I think on-chain loyalty is one that I think, again, is sort of probably closer to theoretically interesting. We've seen lots of startups approach this problem. One thing that I think needs to be solved is around the question of ROI again, where there are tons of people claiming the digital collectibles, whether it's, with the Australian Open and NBA arenas, tons of people collect it, but then there's rarely sort of a follow-on or follow-through action. So figuring out the people who collect it, like, are they doing it just because it's available? Is there a way to actually monetize it and prove to the various sponsors that there's something to do with this type of activation, I think, becomes unlocked. That if there's, again, any founder who thinks they solved that part of the equation, I think we'd love to speak to them. On the gaming side, I think it's tough. There's obviously very established gaming franchises, Madden, 2K, which are, generating, they're basically recurring revenue streams of, they release a new edition with the rookies, new team logos, and get a couple $1 billion in sales. So there's clearly a market demand for it, but I think at least I've yet to personally see a new blockchain element introduced to it that completely revolutionizes the experience. I think this probably gets closer back to like the sports betting part. Like there's probably some fantasy sports element, like sports betting, where you can add, smart contracts, instant payouts with stable coins, that can be done around the gaming element. But I think that's closer to iGaming than the traditional video games you're alluding to.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on. I think in the gaming front, gaming's in a real lull. I think blockchain gaming even more so. But I do think there is still something there, and maybe it is more financialized, maybe it is less so. Who knows? But I think I wanted to pick up a little bit on the on the prediction market side. Obviously, there's the sports angle here, where it, fundamentally, sports right now is the wedge, and I feel like there is a lot of money and attention chasing that way. But it's not necessarily like a revolution. It's just a product that's been in the UK and Europe for a while with Betfair Exchange, but kind of proliferating over into the States. And obviously, the States has this kind of weird state by state regulatory framework that no other place on the planet really does. I mean, there are countries there are laws in, Bavaria that are different to other areas of Germany, for example, and some other places like that. But I think that the US is specifically unique. And I feel like there is still, it's still 95% just chasing the same money that is, either sports traders or sports bettors. But there is some interesting stuff, right? There is some unique elements that are only able to be done on blockchain, whether it be, better pricing, better UI, whether it be for kind of like the mainstream gambler or the trader themselves.
I think one globalization actually matters a lot. I think it's like the fact that everyone can trade on the same market matters. But both from a liquidity perspective, but also if you think about maybe like the sort of naive original intention prediction markets of thinking, this is how a source of truth can come out. If, I am betting on, I don't know, like a Australian cricket, there is someone there who has more knowledge. And then if I was to use that to inform my other decisions, maybe betting across other sports books, like I think that's an interesting idea. And then it's a very simple idea, but I think the fact that stable coins can be used shouldn't be discounted just because it's so simple. Whether it's, to fund and send out payments on prediction markets, but also I think across a bunch of these other use cases where we talk to startups, say if you were an athlete and you wanted to create a brand and you want to sell it, I think in the US, in Canada, in the UK, it's pretty easy to set up something for Shopify so it instantly accept payments. But there's probably 8 to 12 countries around the world where that's true. Versus a few of the stars would say when an athlete or creator launches a product with them, obviously global wealth is concentrated in probably 8 to 12 countries, but the fact they can instantly launch to 150 countries, and there are fans of sports in every country around the world. So I think, it's a very simple idea and it's pretty easy to implement right now for stablecoins, but it's, I think something that's still very, very powerful.
I mean, Meta just launched stablecoin payouts in the Philippines and Colombia, and I think I saw Patrick Collison tweet that they're going to aim for 160 countries soon. So, that's pretty much a game changer for anyone that's monetizing digital anything or any form of ad revenue. And I think that sports teams, athletes, they are all kind of within that kettle of fish, if you kind of think of them as entertainment, content, etc. Look, I want to get the sports team and league perspective. There's obviously the opportunity that we see from a macro perspective. You've kind of talked a little bit about the founding teams and companies that are impressing you and coming to you with specific ideas. Where when you're speaking to teams and leagues, which I'm presuming you do, or athletes or their agents, where do they see the pain points? Where do they want a product or a solution that solves some pain for them?
I think on the athlete, and sort of athlete as a brand, athlete as a celebrity idea, I think one, being able to make sure that their NIL, name, image, or likeness is protected when they do something is very important. I think especially in the age of AI, they find that critically important. It's talked a lot about in sort of music with actors, but I think athletes care about this just as much. I think so when they're going out trying to do a branding deal, a licensing deal, I think that's something they care a lot about, but also making sure whatever system to implement is transparent in terms of if they did something with deal that entitles them to 5% revenue. Blockchain solutions are a very obvious way to solve for this. So I think that's something athletes care a lot about, and then even performance and biometrics data. They want to ensure that they sort of have the say of saying who else can see this data, and sort of blockchain or ZK proofs is another way. They can think about their own data privacy when it comes to providing it to teams, to doctors who have to sign off on what they're doing. I think from the team angle, the biggest thing is around fan data. They ultimately want to know like who their fans are. I think it's been brought up on your podcast multiple times in the past, but for teams' entire fan base, like maybe only 5% ever actually steps foot into an arena at any point in time. So figuring out how to interact with the other 95%, how to monetize that fan base becomes very, very important. And then I think from the league level, it's for them, it's more of an exploration. Like they always want to know, like, what's the new frontier technology? We talked a lot about the viewing experience, and then I do agree. I think going forward, like, I don't know if people watch the full game, but what it's experimenting with, like, personalized streams, you're seeing sort of, I think NFL's actually quite experiment of this, like, different streams, like focusing on different things for a different audience, adding additional layers of analytics for people who care more about sports betting. Like maybe that's a different stream. Ways to clip them videos to short 30-second highlights. I think the broadcasting aspect is very important to leads.
And look, finally, I think these are conversations that we've been having for, 2 or 3, 4 years on the podcast now. What do you see as some of the kind of like accelerants to get us to where we do have this kind of swashbuckling, pioneering, data-driven, Web3 enabled unlock for teams, leagues, athletes, and such? Like, where do you see the big accelerants to getting us to where, some of the things we're talking about are tangible rather than kind of like hypothetical?
So I think you touched on one point, like sort of, I think Netflix, Apple, Amazon coming in is actually a big game changer because one, like naturally being tech companies, they are more tech forward, but they're also coming into sports thinking about it in a different way than traditional sports broadcasters, right? I think Drive to Survive is sort of like the perfect example of like, how can you show sports in a way that's not like how sports would be traditionally shown? By focusing on the drivers as people versus the sport as a whole, I think that brought in a whole new audience, a whole new way of thinking about sports. So I think those companies coming in, acquiring more rights, like Apple coming out with the F1 movie, like all those like fundamentally transformed like how people are thinking and viewing F1. And then I think you've seen F1's like global growth over the last 5 years, but been sort of a completely different level than sort of the entire history of F1. So I think that's very interesting. And then I think as athletes, but also the general population realizes the tooling available to them. I love watching tennis, and now when you watch tennis, you constantly see like Hawkeye tracking, like was the ball in or out. When you see it on TV, then you're like, I wish I can do that in my own game, and then you buy the Swing Vision app where that data is being tracked. You're seeing pro tennis players, like pro golfers, like wearing a Whoop, and they show like what's their actual heartbeat during a match. And then people go buy one for themselves and say like, well, when I go for my 5K run at home, I also want to see like what was my heart rate tracking through all of that. So I think people's focus on wellness also matters quite a bit. And I think like just sort of closing a loop here, it is sort of around the fact that like AI is going to give everyone more time. I think in a positive sense, like more free time to pursue the things we like. And for many of us, the thing we like is sports. So we have more time to watch sports, play sports, interact with sports. We have hopefully more money to spend on sports or health-related experiences. So all of that time and money sort of creates the investable opportunity that we see.
We will round up on that. Chris, where can people find out more about you and TenSquared?
You can visit our website at tensquared.com. We post a lot of our research reports, webinars we do there. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Christopher Cheung. I'll also sort of share some of my own thoughts on research reports we write, but also interesting deals that happen in the sport and media space.
You can find us at sportingcrypto.com or newsletter.sportingcrypto.com. Sign up to the newsletter. Remember, none of what we have said is financial, business, tax, or any other sort of advice, and the views on this podcast are our own and not that of our employers, sponsors, or anyone affiliated with us at all. Thank you very much once more for listening, watching, wherever you're consuming this, and we'll have more Sporting Crypto content for you soon.